Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters, and today I'm joined by Dr. Kat Patrick from Dreaming Spires, and we are going to be talking about how to encourage a reluctant writer. So first of all, Kat, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, and do tell our listeners a little bit about you and your home education journey.
I'd be delighted to. So first of all, what is this accent that I have? I am a dual citizen from Britain, but originally from Texas. So you'll hear the y'alls and you'll hear the buttons. So that's where that accent comes from. I lived half my life in Texas, and then I lived half my life in the UK. The day that I went over my living longer in the UK than in Texas was quite a hard day. But I managed to survive it.
Did you celebrate with a big cup of tea?
I was actually in mourning, actually. I think I probably had tacos.
Yeah, exactly. Under a sunbed. Yeah, quite.
And the day that I had to say the oath to the Queen in order to get my British citizenship was the 4th of July. And hopefully that rings bells for everybody, that it's the US independence. And the lawyer was creasing himself with laughter that I was swearing to the Queen on the day of Independence Day. So life has always been a series of ironies. So I did get a PhD in literary history, actually from the University of Delaware, but all of my studies for it and my supervisor for it were at Cambridge. So there you go, another kind of straddling the two sides. And I taught at some independent girls' schools in Oxford for a few years and had my first child quite late, and realized about the time that she was a year old that I was really struggling with balancing the heavy workload of an English and drama teacher in school with a quite difficult child and toddler. And difficult, just she was just, as it turns out, she was just really clever. But everything was she was very intense. And there's a book called Your Spirited Child, or The Spirited Child, or something like that. That was a real boon for me to read, because when I was saying things like she really lacks focus, it would say, what about if you said she's very perceptive? I was like, oh yeah, that's nicer. So she was an intense child, and I was struggling in my motherhood, and I was struggling in my teaching. And I said, you know what, I can stop being a teacher, but I can't stop being a mother. So that's where I began my home educating journey, actually, was that big decision. I remember the first day that I took her up to the park that was up just up a little footpath from our house. And instead of having to say, okay, we've got time for 3 swings and 2 goes on the slide and 1 bouncy bridge, and then we have to go home. And I was like, yeah, be on the swing as long as you like. Enjoy the bouncy bridge. And it was a real moment that I was like, this is a turning point of my life. And I was already envisioning myself more or less as a home educating mom from a very young age, but it was probably there that I said, yeah, I'm going to home educate my child, and then didn't realize that it was going to shortly thereafter be 4 children. So yeah, I had 4 children under the age of 7. So they're basically spread 2 years apart, and they went girl, boy, girl, boy. Everyone said, well, you arranged that really well. It's like, yeah, I had everything to do with it. And then, though I dabbled a bit in some curricula like Heart of Dakota, Konos, really inspired by Educating the Wholehearted Child by Sally Clarkson, and I did some Montessori. It wasn't too long. I guess my eldest was about 9. I found the Charlotte Mason method, and that's what I've been doing ever since. Really good book as an introduction to Charlotte Mason method is Modern Miss Mason by Leah Bowden. So if anyone's interested in learning more about it, that's probably a good place to start.
Oh, and
Did
we've
I answer your
actually
question?
You answered my question perfectly. We've actually done a double bill on the Charlotte Mason approach. We did one on an introduction to the Charlotte Mason approach and also one on using the Charlotte Mason approach all the way through exams, because I always had it in
Absolutely.
my mind. Yeah, I thought it was just one of those things you did with little ease and you didn't really carry through once you got to the heavyweight stuff in, key stage 4. But actually it was very eye-opening for me that. So you started Dreaming Spires home learning, and that was based on the Charlotte Mason approach, was it?
It is, yes, because basically Charlotte Mason method, there's all kinds of nitty gritty about things, and people can get caught up in all the planning and the routine and the schedules and making sure that you're doing all the moving parts the right way. And I think the lovely thing about Charlotte Mason is you need to only know 2 things, and they were completely revolutionary when she was living in the Victorian times. If you think about Victorian education, it was all like rote learning, standing up, saying everything, 1 times 1 is 1 and things like that. And she just felt like that was just such a stultifying and limiting atmosphere for the children. And so over time, she developed this philosophy of education. And I think there are basically 2 pillars of it that still informs Dreaming Spires today. And my home education of my children, I just got 1 at home now. I've graduated from high school level 3. And I've even graduated from university now. My eldest, that difficult child who was just perceptive, and now she works for NASA. So, everything I would have wanted.
Did I
happened.
interview her as
Oh,
part of, I
you
think I did,
did.
right? As part of the Sharing Our Successes season that we did.
Yes.
Yes, of
Yes.
course. How's she getting on?
I don't recall if you were interviewing her when she was an intern with NASA.
She was just about to start her internship, I think.
Yes, well, she
Yeah,
beat out people with 20 years of experience for a proper job now. So she's working
that's
for
fabulous.
NASA now in science communications. And just last week, if you went to nasa.org, her article about AI was the very first featured article. So
Wonderful.
I can't go there. I'll start crying, then my mascara will run.
It's a podcast. It can run as much as you like.
That's true. Um, so 2 pillars. Let's get back to the 2 pillars of Charlotte Mason. The first one is children are born persons, which means each child already has the capacity for learning and they are infinitely curious. And by taking on board that they are already a whole person, learning every chance they get. I remember when my eldest, Lauren, would walk along the streets of Chalbury, and you have the big letters written on the road that say something like slow, and she would walk up to it. I mean, she was 2.5 or something, and she'd point to it and she'd go, S, S. I was like, yay. But they're just sponges for learning. And so the idea that somehow we have to teach them things is kind of putting the cart before the horse. The horse is ready to go. So what you want to do, instead of pouring into their empty bucket, you want to be the person who lights their fire, because all the materials are there and you just want to give a little spark and then see how the fire goes. So the first pillar is children are born persons. And the second one is education is the science of relations, which basically means education is best, learning is best when a child has buy-in, when a child is being inspired and their interests are being nurtured. And there's so many ways to offer children or impose upon children educational materials that just are dead to them. They're just rote, they're just forced, and they don't often learn very well, and they don't like learning, and it puts a lid on their interests. And so instead, it's about getting a relationship. And at Dreaming Spires, one of the things that I say to them on the very first webinar with them is that what I want out of the year for them is that they have a relationship with the books they're reading. And that could mean they hate them. Some of them really don't like their books, and they might feel like throwing them against the wall. They might feel like burning them. I know my British novels kids, they often have a lot of trouble with Wuthering Heights. They like the book in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of the main character, Heathcliff, is quite an abusive chap, and they don't relate to him, but their feelings toward him are very angry and frustrating. I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's what I want you to do, is remember the book because of your feelings that you get out of reading it and your opinions on what's going on. And just a response to the book that is visceral like that. So those are the two things.
That I think that is so true about the relationship with books, or the relationship with learning. I remember very distinctly when I was about 15, I read Lord of the Flies, and I got to the end and I read the last sentence and I picked up the book and I threw it straight against the wall. And I've always remembered that because it was such a visceral response. And yet I also really remember the book and I remember the story because it did have, I hated it so much. I hated everything about the book. And sometimes that is how a book gets into you, isn't it? You just don't like it.
And if a book is quite dead for a student, then, if it's dead, if they've just got nothing, then it can be very difficult to expect them to respond to it and to remember it. But sometimes they don't like a book very much, and yet it will spark a connection with another book they read. And even that is having a relationship with the book, because maybe this is a little bit of probably an esoteric example, but one year we read Ivanhoe, and if people are following the chronological order of my courses, they'll read book one of Fairy Queen. And in Ivanhoe, the main character obviously is Ivanhoe, and in Fairy Queen, the main character is the Red Cross Knight, and they have a lot of things in common. So when people are reading Red Cross Knight, having read Ivanhoe, they'll say, I don't know, but Red Cross Knight, he kind of reminds me of Ivanhoe. And I'll ask them why, and they'll give me some reasons, and I'll say, I totally agree with you that they kind of are useless for most of the book, and you wonder why they're important until the end. And then you're like, oh, yes, they were quite crucial to the ending of the story.
And I think that brings in something that I very much got from the Charlotte Mason podcasts that we did, which was the importance of kind of quality of book, and that there's something about, like, in inverted commas, a good book that will grab you in. But then I remember from the podcast that it's not so much like it's not like there's a canon of good books, but it's more about whether the book actually grabs you, and that's what sort of can make it a book that is alive for you.
Yeah, the term we use in Charlotte Mason is living book. And that usually is trying to distinguish from something like a textbook, or perhaps some of the early books that you get in sort of Usborne books and things like that, where it's kind of a page with a bunch of pictures and a bunch of captions. My children used to like to read those, and they wanted me to read them for their bedtime stories. And I was like, there's nothing to read. It's all bitty, and it just doesn't connect together. I mean, fine, look at the pictures and enjoy the captions and things, but let's read something that has a narrative that and I can do voices. I love doing voices. So if I couldn't do voices, I was like, yeah, I don't want to read this book.
I know just what you mean. My son had a pop-up book of the periodic table and he absolutely adored it. I remember he wanted me to read it as a book at bedtime and I was reading The Hobbit and I was like, look, I'm doing all these voices for The Hobbit. I'm not reading a pop-up periodic table book. I'm sorry. It's no fun for me at all.
And The Hobbit's exactly a perfect one because there are 13 dwarves. How do you have different voices for 13
I
dwarves?
managed to have different voices for every Mr. Man character, and there's about 45 of them. So
Oh yeah, we love Mr. Man too. Mr.
it
Men.
was all the regional accents of Britain came into play for those. So
Oh
I'm
yeah.
guessing that when it comes to encouraging reluctant writer or a child that maybe doesn't enjoy putting pen to paper, that it would be that one of your tips, I'm guessing, would be for them to form a relationship with their learning. Would that be a route in? And if so, how would one do that if your child really doesn't want to write?
The thing about reluctant writers is, I think, like saying my child was really intense and unfocused when I should have been saying she was perceptive. I think reluctant writers is something we're imposing on children that isn't actually age appropriate. There is a fantastic book. She's also a Charlotte Mason person called Karen Glass, spelled just like glass, or gloss,
Mm.
Glass. She wrote a book called Know and Tell, which is Know and Tell. And it's about one of the hallmarks of the Charlotte Mason method is doing narration with your book. So you read a book for 20 or 30 minutes or something. You may be reading it out loud to your children, or the children may be old enough to read them themselves. And then they tell back what they just read. It's not talking about the book, it's retelling the book.
Mm.
So that narration is very important to Charlotte Mason as a way of building a relationship with the book and remembering it and pulling out the important aspects of the book. But it's not until a child is about 11 or 12 that they start writing the
No,
narrations.
no writing at all before that, or just little
Not
bits.
quite, not quite, but not writing about the narration. I'll get to some writing in just a second, but
Mm.
um, what happens is if you keep all that oral over those years in primary school, what you're doing is helping a child build their vocabulary, their fluency in their discussions, their thinking, drawing out the important parts of a book and reliving the parts of the book. And all those things are really great in growing that part of the brain and the memory part of the brain. But if you ask them to write it down, you're adding some other aspects of the brain that aren't developed yet. And then instead of a child talking for 10 whole straight minutes with almost like verbal diarrhea about my second child is just like this. He can go on and on and on about what he's currently interested in. And he was actually my most reluctant writer. And he could go on for 10 minutes straight talking about, let me think of something. Well, we read it a little bit later in our home education journey, but An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadley is a really brilliant book. It's a nonfiction book, but it's about this astronaut and his experiences and then relating them to crises on Earth or things like that. And he could talk 10 minutes straight without a breath about it. But if I asked him to write something down, he would probably write me 2 sentences
Mm.
that were very basic. And so if that's what's happening with children at a younger age, where the writing part of it is difficult because of their fine motor skills and trying to make them work at something that makes them very tired, then it's not the right thing to be doing at that moment. So there is writing in primary school, though, but it's copy work, which is taking maybe a part of the astronaut book, maybe a stanza of a poem. If you're a Christian, you might do verses from the Bible. And that is working on the fine motor skill of writing. And it's only about 10 minutes a day. And it teaches them letter formation. They learn punctuation. They learn to be focused on the words. They will get to the point where their memory of picturing the words gets really good, so they can do 4 or 5 words in a row after they look from the book, see those 4 or 5 words, and then they look on their paper and they write it out by hand, envisioning in their brain those words. And that envisioning in their brain is how you learn to spell. And so it's just day after day, week after week, year after year of this little tiny activity that builds up great mechanics for writing later. So your spelling, your punctuation, your dialogue punctuation, your vocabulary, and your variety of sentence structures, plus that ability to observe and remember and visualize words. So they are writing. I remember my children used to really love map skills workbooks, and I'm not against workbooks as a kind of activity that they enjoy doing. And my number 2, the reluctant writer, would look at his map books, and he'd be on this map of a little town center, and it would ask, what corner is the library on? And let's say one street was Elm Avenue and the other one was Walnut Street. And the answer should be Elm Avenue and Walnut Street, but he didn't want to write all that out. So he would write EA and WS. And this was a real revelation for me at that moment about, do I make him write down Elm Avenue and Walnut Street, which he finds really uncomfortable and doesn't enjoy. He must have been about 7 or so at this time. Or do I reward the fact that he got the answer right that the map skills is looking for? Can he read the map? Yes. Do I make him write those words down, every single letter that's really painful and annoying and frustrating for him? Children are born persons. Education is a science of relations. He's relating to the map skills. He's reading the map. He's enjoying doing the map reading. Why put in front of him that obstacle that turns him off of map reading by making him write down every single letter of Elm Avenue and Walnut Street? So that's a very typical problem in primary school, is that when people start trying to make children write, and some kids, like my first child, writing, she loved it. She would dictate to me books when she was very young, and then as she got older, she was able to write them herself. But, you know, a lot of times girls have a more developed part of that brain anyway, so they will do it earlier. Not always, but sometimes. But what upsets me is that children get labeled as bad writers or poor writers, and it's just not time. If you read Know and Tell by Glass, she starts talking about transitioning into writing down these narrations at around 11 or 12. And you can first start off with the child telling you and you transcribing for them. And then I would make my kids actually then copy work their own narration, so they saw that they were producing this work verbally, and here it is written down, now you write it. And then once we got over that, then it was time to let them write them themselves, and usually by then they were typing on the computer. And definitely my son found it easier to type than to handwrite, but it took him 2 or 3 years of these weekly narrations that he was typing for Dreaming Spires, first starting off just no punctuation, no capitalizations, no paragraphs. He would still do some abbreviations. So when we were doing Paradise Lost and it was Adam and Eve, he'd write A and E, and then he put in brackets, oh, that's funny, A and E, like the emergency room. You know, he was making these jokes in it. But eventually, I don't think he was until sort of 17 before he could write a developed and competent, like really, I guess competent's not good enough, but a very good essay. And then he went off to university, and now he's the top student in political science at his university. He's in 2 National Honor Societies. He's known for how well he writes. I mean, if you told me at 12 he was going to do that, I would have just died because he was terrible. So it's a process. It's just waiting and waiting against everybody's official milestones that children are supposed to be reaching. And I think a lot of times children are being labeled way too early. I do have a friend whose child was very, very dyslexic, who waited a long time before she got her child assessed. And I think she still feels like, though they didn't get the assessment until 13 or 14, she's still glad that she waited that long. And her child just took longer to complete school, and that's fine.
Would you say that the main things I'm getting from that are that not to force your child to write too early or too young, or if they are, just to do copywriting. So it's not about the getting their ideas out onto the page, it's just about their fine motor skills. And also I got the impression from what you were saying that not to kind of conflate writing with other subjects. So if they're learning history, not to stress about their writing, but just worry about the history. So maybe they orally tell you what they've learned. And then to, when they're older, like 11 or 12, to allow them then to start bringing in the writing. So you mentioned typing. Would you see those as interchangeable? So if somebody is a reluctant pen on paper writer, is there a point at which you would say, well, realistically, you need to be able to put pen on paper, even though your typing is good and you're able to get your ideas out on a word processor, for example?
I think what happens is around 11, 12, 13, when you get into what may be key stage 3, we never really did key stage 3. We just did slow key stage 4.
Mm.
But I think when you're in a variety of subjects, you will tend to write things down in sciences or in maths. So they are putting pen to paper in those instances. And so again, talking about not conflating things, it's as long as they're writing something, and you continue with copywork as well, because you're still trying to improve sentence structure, variety. All these things are the IGCSE markers in English language. So sentence variety, vocabulary variety, good punctuation, and good spelling, and understanding paragraphing. That's something that people seem to be losing the art of these days. So I think once you get into secondary school, there's a lot of opportunities to write by hand that are already there. So you don't necessarily have to insist that a child is writing, say, a language arts, an English paper by hand, or even a history paper by hand, because they'll have a lot of opportunities to write things by hand. But there does come a time, should your children take exams, and I'm of the opinion and the belief that not everybody has to take UK exams or even that many for various reasons. People can ask me what my thinking is on that. But there are opportunities to continue a kind of liberal arts education through secondary and make a portfolio of learning and a CV of learning that universities will accept. And as more and more people are doing it, more and more universities are accepting it. And in fact, Exeter University is putting someone into position whose job it is to work with home educators who aren't going to use the UCAS forms. So it's very exciting developments on this.
So I'm guessing that there you're talking about, are you talking about the high school diploma, or are you talking about something else instead of the high school diploma?
No, it is the high school
But yeah.
diploma.
Okay, I mean we've done
Well,
a
A high
Mm.
school diploma, it is two things. There is the US transcript, which is your educational CV. And once you complete the usual spread of subjects and the number of subjects, then the completion is the diploma certificate that says you completed it. So it is the high school diploma, but you can do a transcript anyway, or the educational CV.
Okay, I mean that's
Even if you're going to do exams, that can go on to that CV of education.
yeah, and I've done a podcast on the high school diploma for anyone who's interested in that. And since I recorded that podcast, I can tell our listeners that my daughter is doing the high school diploma because I was so convinced by the podcast that I did with Michelle Holmes. And she is also doing her GCSEs alongside it. And what she's doing is transcribing the learning from the GCSEs plus other stuff onto her high school diploma. And actually, it's interesting that we're talking about reluctant writing and taking your time, because one of the reasons I wanted to do the high school diploma was because I was worried that she wouldn't do very well in her GCSEs, because she is an example, she's very dyslexic, and she is an example of a child who, you're talking about, when they get older, they tend to get a little bit better at it. And I'm sure there are people listening who are sitting there thinking, well, I've got a 14, 15, 16-year-old not getting any better at it. And this is the scenario I find myself in with my daughter, is that she has amazing ideas in her head. She can talk about stuff really very eloquently, but when it comes to getting the ideas down on paper, very much like you said, I get one or two sentences and then she's done. Now, so I decided to go the high school diploma route because I knew it would give a better reflection of her abilities. Now,
Yes.
for the people listening, if any of our listeners have a child who is older and is at basically near on GCSE age and really does have to be writing or typing their ideas out, would you have any advice for them about how they can motivate their children? Or I'm not sure, like what approach could they take for a reluctant writer who's older?
Well, I think I don't know if Michelle said this in her podcast, but one of the things that I've been inspired by Michelle about is that she says, what is your child already doing that they're very passionate about? And let's take, for example, someone who is a dancer, and really high quality, high level dancer. And you can have a self-motivated, self-designed module about, say, the history of dancing. And it could include things like, collages of dancers, biographies of dancers, almost like a top trumps of dancers. And then ultimately, after all this research and immersion in the thing that this child loves, you can have them write about the history of dance or ballet or the Russian ballet company or something like that. And the first attempt may not be very organized or have very many commas or full stops or something, but when they are getting inspired about writing something, sometimes the block is trying to write the final draft the first time around. And this is the one thing I don't like about the IGCSEs for English language, is that real life English language skills are expressed by collaboration, revision, thinking, trying again, adding information over time. And when you're in that IGCSE and you examine, you got 2 hours to write a description, for example. It's not realistic, and there is a lot of pressure to churn something out first draft first time, or final draft first time. But in your own home while you're trying to nurture these writing thoughts, structures, expressions, the mechanics like your spelling and punctuation and stuff, you can just give them a lot of grace in their first go, and then break it down as you're trying to talk about structure and you're talking about ideas and you're talking about the mechanics. It's just take it slow and keep working on it. And I know, I mean, this is what I specialize in. If anyone wants to outsource to me to do this kind of thing, fantastic. That's what I do. But I know that a lot of parents may not have the money. It might not be at the right time for them. It might not, maybe their child doesn't want to read as much as we read in our courses. So how do you do it yourself? And I think Karen Glass talks even about this. And it's basically, you read it as the audience and you say to your child, you give feedback and say, I don't understand what you're saying in this paragraph. I don't understand why you talked about this here at the beginning, and then you talked about it again at the end. And it's just as the audience, what are your barriers to understanding, your barriers to clarity, your barriers to understanding what the child is trying to say? And you just work as a partnership to clarify it more and more. So I think the answer to that was, as they're getting into secondary and they're reluctant writers, they don't write very much about whatever topic has been imposed upon them. Try a topic that's not imposed, but is organic to them. And once they have success at the thing they've enjoyed, they have like opened up a little bit more of a margin in their brain for that. And so then they've got the capacity to try something else, maybe something else they enjoy, or maybe it's time to see if they can do an argument about, I have my students write one right now about, should we be really trying to get a man to Mars? And yeah, they had a lot of opinions. But interestingly, this is also really important in writing. And this is why I think it's so good in primary school to teach a child to tell back the story they just read. It's because they need to have a pot of information before they can write about it. And I find a lot of students, in fact, the IGC exams in like the 2012, 2013, they had to change it because they would ask a question like, should we get rid of cars for the environment? And the answers there were really poor because they didn't have enough knowledge and information to be able to answer that question. So when I ask them, and my students, when I say, should we even bother sending a man to Mars? They have to go off and research this. What are the pros and what are the cons? And you've got to, search the internet and find your information and then have a decision and make a decision. That's why now in the IGCSE for Cambridge in their second paper, that argument that they used to just say, hey, should we get rid of cars to save the earth? They now give you an insert with materials written already, and then you have to use those materials to write your argument. So they're now giving them the basis on their argument. And what I do is I call that process of building your wall, so that you have all this strong information, this background information, and then I teach a visual concept of essay writing as putting a curtain over a window. And so, there's all different parts of the curtain that are like your introduction and your topic sentences and your explanations. But the idea is you cannot hang a curtain without a wall. So making sure a child has enough information to write is a huge part of that trick. And now this is mostly secondary I'm talking about, because in the primary years, every book that you guys read together or they read, just talk about it. And that's building their wall. And that is a skill that a lot of children just don't have, because most curricula that you'll find for home educators and in school, they'll ask things like, who is Ivanhoe going to marry? And the answer is Rowena. Everything is like these short, closed answers. And instead, when you do narration, it lets the child pick out what the important information is. And you just say, tell me about Rowena. And then they can go on and say she cries all the time.
Wow, is that her defining feature? Sounds like she should be in Bridgerton. So I get the impression that for young children, you're saying it's about the oral narration. So just engaging with the material and being able to verbalize their ideas. And then when they get older, maybe if there's people listening and their children are sitting history or environmental management or whatever the GCSE is, if they're not enjoying the writing, you would maybe once a week get them to write an essay on something that they're really into, like why all children should do Minecraft to learn about rock formation or something, right? Whatever it is that's really appealing to them at the time. And so that way, even though it's writing, but it's not writing about what they're studying, like environmental management, it's writing about what they're passionate about, and that exposure to writing, even if it's not writing English language essays, will actually be the way that they get better at writing.
Oh, yes. I mean, one very popular question that I sometimes ask my students when we're in that unit in my course, I'll say, should parents pay children for their chores? And they write an awful lot about that. But interestingly, they're 50-50. Some will argue vehemently that yes, they should be paid, and some write vehemently that they shouldn't. And they will write, typing single space, they'll write a page and a half on that, which is, I don't know how many words, like 700 words maybe.
And do you get them to structure it? I mean, would you sort of encourage them to do the paragraph structuring, an introduction, topic sentences, that kind of thing?
Oh, yes.
So in that case, what are your top tips for structuring a work like that?
Pause. A long pause. Well, it's the same idea. If you think about a wall, so you've built up the information so the child has something to say. And if you think of a curtain with the curtain pole at the top, the curtain pole is the question. And then you have rings that hold each curtain, and the rings are each paragraph. And so it's really important that each paragraph is on one idea. So let's talk about, I don't like the chore one. Well, let's just do the chore one. So usually I think it is important that and maybe you can just get this off an IGCSE revision guide anyway, or from past papers, but it's important to know what is involved. So there is some knowledge involved. What is involved in how you write a speech, how you write a newspaper article, how you write a magazine article, a letter, a journal, an interview. I think those are the 6 things that you might be asked on an exam. And in an argument paper, one of the best things to do is introduce the topic and already decide what your opinion is. So there are many different arguments about whether or not children should be paid for their chores. I personally think that they should not be. And then it's just a pro forma for argument essays, because the next paragraph, the best thing to do rhetorically is to say, now, of course, there are good reasons to pay children for chores. That might be, it's like having a job, like people get paid for their jobs. Why shouldn't a child get paid for their job? You might have 1 or 2 brief arguments for the other side. And then 3 paragraphs after that, each one with a topic. So you shouldn't pay for the chores because you're part of the family, and people in a family do what needs to be done. I can't think of 2 other reasons off the top of my head, but let's just say another one is learning to be responsible for your own things. And the final one is, I don't know, because you're helpful. I don't know, good character. And that's the way that's a pro forma for writing argument essays and being able to follow that structure. So that's the kind of thing that I teach in my Middle Ages Lit Out on Writing, because it goes along with the Cambridge Board IGCSE papers. But I also think that there's a lot of reasons I don't like exams. I already said it's because they expect you to perform an English language final draft in a few relatively short period of time that I don't think is realistic for how people's language arts actually happen. But the one thing I do like about the exam is that it does, I don't know, force or require or encourage or give the opportunity to learn about these different kinds of writing. I call them transactional writing as opposed to like literary writing or creative writing. But I think it's really important to expose children about these different kinds of writing. If a child grows up and needs to write to the council about something, they need to know how to write in a way that is respectful to their audience and gives good arguments so that the council will listen and not just lambast them because they're annoyed and say, you're a bunch of idiots. How can you not notice that this is wrong? It's learning that each piece of writing has a format that's appropriate. Know who your audience is. As the author of it, you need to be respectful to the people so that you get your purpose done. And that is, I think, a really good thing about the IGCSE English language exams, is giving the kids exposure to that. I think otherwise, these days, it's much more rare to recognize or ever have to write or be exposed to letters to the editor or letters to the council or a speech or an interview or anything like that. So I do respect that about the exams, is what's in the scope and sequence of it. And so there is some argument for making use of revision materials, even if you don't take the exam, because you will be exposing your children to these kinds of facts of writing, good practice.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I'm not an exams fan at all. I think a lot of it is hoop jumping, but I quite like the statistics GCSE. I think that kind of understanding of data analysis is really helpful. And I quite like the Cambridge English Language IGCSE because it is very, understanding how to write a letter, understanding how to write an article, understanding, how to write a journal entry. And I quite like that very practical nature of it. You mentioned that after your child has written something, you would engage collaboratively with them, and you would say something like, well, I don't really understand what it is you're saying there, or why is it you've mentioned that? Now, I wonder whether and maybe this is just me, or maybe some of my listeners are thinking the same thing, but sometimes when I have a child who really doesn't want to write, I kind of never want to critique them because I really worry I'm going to put them off by saying anything even vaguely negative. So I tend to sort of, no matter how bad it is, I tend to be like, oh wow, brilliant, I'm so pleased you wrote something, even if it's like pretty turgid. But would you say that actually you're better off engaging collaboratively, even if it is from a slightly critical standpoint?
So let's talk about these narrations again, where as they start to getting 11, 12, 13, you have them write summaries of the things that they're reading. And those things in Charlotte Mason, you don't critique. But if you're saying, hey, we're going to write this persuasive essay, and I want you to write me a letter. Let's just say a letter, because that's kind of the easiest. I want you to write me a letter about why we should or should not get a dog, or something that, or get fish, or why we should go to the Indian this Saturday, or something that they're going to need to argue with you and give good reasons of doing something. And then you're going to say, and we're going to use this as an exercise in learning how to write an argument. And so let's say they write it. This is what I would do if I were having a child who's very reluctant and would feel very hurt if I criticize them. I would actually put on a hat and say, this is my critique hat, or this is my teacher hat, or this is my hard to convince grumpy hat. And then use that hat and have that on when you're doing the critique. And then when it's over, take the hat off and you're done. I know that's stupid in a way, but in some ways, this could be your symbol that I am going to critique this. And it's not because I don't love you, and it's not because I'm moaning at you, but every now and then we have to reach a bar of something. And if you're uncomfortable as a mom or a dad, shifting between teacher and mom or dad, then maybe some people sit in a certain chair, some people do their work at a certain table, or we did it at a certain time of day. So we always had our serious work at a certain time of day. And then that's when mom was teacher. Often I was learner at the same time. I learned so much home educating with my kids. But if you need some kind of separation between mom and teacher, then something like that might work for people.
I think that's really good advice. I think that creating some sort of delineation, whether that is in time or space, I think can be really helpful. I know that that's something I found really helpful during my home education journey. I have a lot of people would say to me, oh, I could never do that because my children just wouldn't listen to me, or my children would never take me seriously. But actually, it's almost like children are very able to separate. I think they're very able to separate off these different roles that you play, and just as children interact with you differently if you're sitting outside in a cafe than if you're at the dinner table, it's exactly the same. I found when we were doing lessons. Okay, so far I've got that people should think about start not pushing writing too early, and instead focusing on narrating, telling you verbally about what the ideas they've got from a text, and what ideas they have of their learning, and creating a relationship with their learning, and then building up their fine motor skills by doing copywriting, and not bringing writing into other subjects too much. Yeah.
And there are other ways to build up the fine motor skills other than writing. So this is something I learned from my Montessori dabbling, is that there are so many activities that you can do with your hands that are actually writing skills too. Now, when they're really young, it would be things like spooning some dried beans into another bowl. That's one. Taking tongs. Is that what you call them? I call them tongs, like for cooking. And using tongs to move little pom-pom balls from one to another. Maybe even with fingers moving one to another. It might be, my kids used to take spaghetti, and they would put Cheerios on the spaghetti. All those things are fine motor skills. Playing with Lego is fantastic for building up your hand-eye coordination. Using scissors, any kind of artwork with painting or drawing, all those things. And in fact, when they're really young and they're just learning to form letters, when they're very young, the bigger the letter formations, like on a chalkboard, really big, using their finger in sand, or usually or cornstarch or something, in mud, painting with water, big movements for letter formation. even using letters that are already on card or magnets or something that they can move around. I guess you get the idea. There's a
I
lot of
do
different ways to
very much.
strengthen the hand-eye coordination when they're younger, and that doesn't mean that you stop doing that when they're older. So like Airfix models, that's something really good. Finger knitting, crochet, all those
Mm-hmm.
things are actually writing skills.
That's right. And actually, we have a podcast coming up in the next couple of months with a lady that helps to improve fine motor skills or writing skills, but never actually picks up pen to paper. It's all about those kind of alternative routes into improving your children's writing. And then, so to go back at when it comes to the older children, I think you were suggesting that they should focus on writing about what they love and what they really enjoy, and maybe getting them to read it back out loud to you, what they've written, taking it slow, and having an understanding of not just making sure they've got the factual knowledge that they need to be able to write, but also understanding the format, as in how to actually structure what they're writing and base that on the audience, and what information then they're wanting to get across. And then also we were talking a little bit about where criticism comes in and your role as a home educating parent when it comes to perhaps guiding your child to improve their writing. So I feel like we've got a lot of really good advice there for parents with children who may be reluctant writers. So before we finish up, I just wanted to ask if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about what you offer and where they can find your company and your offerings on the internet.
Dream Inspires Home Learning started back in 2012 when my perceptive child was very keen to what I would say go up a level in her studies. And we didn't have anyone in our local area who was going, and I also had already decided we weren't going to do GCSEs. At the time that I was an examiner for Cambridge, and I like the exam better now, but I still think you can do much of the same thing without taking the exam and taking the risk of getting poor marks, even on the day you're sick or something. So and I was already going to do a broad study of like the American transcript system instead of how you hone down more and more into a single subject in the UK. So I got together with a number of different people, some in the UK, some in the US, and I started teaching one of the courses. My first one was Middle Ages Literature with the add-on writing extension. That is the thing that's like revision for the IGCSE. And since then, we've grown to about 40 courses. There are 9 of us. All of us are home educators. Everybody has postgraduate degrees and expertise in their subjects. So we have Spanish, French, English, art history. We've got a geometry for maths. We've got lots of sciences, geography, business. It's not business studies, it's economics, and classical civilization, and then history. And I think I covered everybody. I'd hate to miss somebody out. Sometimes I do.
It's like an Oscars acceptance speech, isn't it? You don't want to miss anyone out.
Well, we've been working together for the one who's been with us the shortest amount of time is about 2 years, but very experienced. And then I've been with others. Well, actually, some of them I did a co-op in primary school with them. So we've been working together for a long time, and everybody uses the Living Book Charlotte Mason method. And even if they're going alongside getting ready for exams, so the classical civilization is an OCR exam basis. Biology, chemistry, their exam basis, Spanish, French, my Middle Ages Lit, and then my Renaissance is really for supporting the literature exam. The art history is exposure to what you can do at A-level in art history, so on and on and on. So we've got our eyes on UK syllabi the same time that we're doing this Living Books child-orientated getting their ideas, getting them excited. And so we're at the websites, dreamingspireshomeLearning.com. Sometimes you have to put a www in front. Sometimes you have to put an HTTPS colon / If you get a notice that it's not a live website, then you probably just need to find me on Facebook at Dreaming Spires Home Learning, and then you can find the link to click on. So we are registering now already for the next year, and my British novel course is already full. Our Celts, Saxons, and Vikings has only sort of 2 places on it. Spanish 2 is very full, so some of the courses are filling up pretty fast. And we are going to run some summer school this year as well. So we got 6 weeks of a taster course for people. We accept students as young as 11. And if you are interested in talking to me about where's the right place to start, then I'm very happy to have that discussion. And I was just saying to you, Eleanor, before we started, that we just received our accreditation in the US. So we are now officially accredited for high school transcripts. So I wouldn't really expect anyone to take all their courses with us, like an all-in-one that does all sort of 24 courses on a transcript over 4 years, because I sort of feel like that's a lot of work for people, because we are honors level. And I say honors level because some universities say that they will take honors level courses instead of APs. If you don't know any of that, what I just said, come on over to HE Success Without UK Exams on Facebook and learn more about it. But we have that Facebook page, and then on Instagram, I think it's cat_Patrick. No, I think it's @Patrick _ Dreaming Spires HL. And I know that's really long, but I was having a lot of people trying to clone my account. And this way, if they clone the account, they have to change something instead of just adding a number at the end, because it's the maximum number of characters you can have. So that's why it's all really long. But I'm always posting stuff on there about my own children, about things we're doing at Dreaming Spires. I've got so many brags about my current students, the things that they just surprise me all the time. I have one class right now, my British novel class. Normally, I say I want them to be better in May than they are today. And I have an idea about how far they'll get by the end of the year. And these guys, they've gone beyond what I can. I'm struggling to think of what else I can ask them to do to kind of boost them up again. It's like, I don't know. I think I need you to write a PhD thesis now. I don't know. But they're so motivated. They bounce ideas off of each other. They get connected. In our safe social space that we have. And actually, we're going to have our first camping trip this year in August. So we're hoping a lot of them will come together in August. And once that happens, then they get a really strong circle of friends, and then they share their circle of friends, and it just snowballs with their social life as well, which I think is really exciting, because it's an online company. So people are like, oh, they're so isolated. It's like, no. We still haven't got too many of the Americans flying over for the camping trip, but maybe next year, if we do it again, we'll say it's an annual thing. You guys put that in your annual plans.
You'll have to have a camping trip at Yosemite or something next year, and then we can all go off on a jolly.
That sounds complicated, but yes, we could. It's always just so hot, though. It's so hot in the summer here. I don't think it would be very enjoyable.
As a Brit, I can safely say that as I'm looking out at wet Wales, I would happily take some heat right now.
Hey, we're having our camping trip in Wales.
Are you? Where are you having your camping trip?
I don't remember.
Somewhere in Wales.
Somewhere by where Yvonne Mason lives.
Fair enough. I hope it's
Mid-Wales,
nice weather for you there then. I mean, Wales is I've traveled all over the world, and Wales is the most beautiful place in the world I've ever been to. So I think you've chosen a good spot for your camping trip.
We camped once as a family near, hold on, more or less, Planet Lois.
It's very good.
Yeah. I was hijacked at a park by the park ranger, and I told him where I was staying, and he was like, he
That's not
said,
how you
"Say
say it,
after
right?
me." But we were camping on this rocky riverbank, and next to the Severn, and I woke up the next day, and the Severn was 1 inch from my tent.
At least it wasn't in the tent.
It was
I
really
have
close.
I have woken up when I went camping with my parents when I was a teenager. I woke up and I reached my hand down to get my book, and it was just all water. The entire tent was underwater, so we all moved to a hotel. So yeah, let's hope your camping experience is not like that this summer.
Well, we have it's a really great site that has barns and marquees, and so even if it's a washout, we'll stay inside and watch films, so it'll be fine.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah,
Well,
we got that planned.
that sounds like a very good contingency plan for the Welsh weather. Well, thank you so much, Kat. It's been really helpful to talk through how to encourage a reluctant writer, and it's really lovely to meet you as well because you and I have
Yeah.
skirted around the same Facebook groups for many
Oh,
years, so it's
I've
been a
stalked
pleasure.
you actually. I've been stalking. Did you feel
How
the hair on the
exciting!
back of your neck
I've never had
standing
a
up?
stalker before. I felt thoroughly thrilled for that moment.
I should put on my stalker hat.
That's it. We all need a particular hat for different
Yeah,
roles, right?
I
Well,
think
thank you
so.
so much. It's really been lovely to speak to you, and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.